Anybody? Actually, I was going to, right now we've had a round of 2 questions per one of our media people. I was going to introduce now some of the questions from the voters who came in to the Times, News Times, and then we'll go back to you. We have plenty of time. This question goes to Mr. Greenberg, and the voter asks, what can be done to reduce waste, fraud, and duplication in federal programs? Or how can we provide better oversight and control over federal spending?
That's a loaded question.
It is.
Yeah. I've called for the elimination of the Department of Energy, for instance, because the Department of Energy in 1976 was guaranteeing energy independence in 25 years, and that certainly didn't happen. There is a lot of waste in the government. For instance, I think food stamps is up to 47 million participants, and up from 25 million participants. I think that a lot of those folks don't need food stamps, for instance. A lot of those folks are using expensive Adidas or have cell phones. There is a lot of waste in the government. I've said year after year that the government is big, bad, and broken, frankly. 3 B's, that we have to rein in spending. We have to be careful about how we spend our dollars. We have to reduce fraud. That question could be answered probably in 2 weeks, with details and other facts. But we have to do everything that we can to try to streamline the government. And mostly what that means in many respects is to devolve to the states, pursuant to the 10th Amendment, give back to the states a lot of the powers that the federal government now have. For instance, Common Cause. To me, Common Cause is something I'm against. I think that the best teachers, for instance, are the parents. The second best teachers are the teachers. The worst teachers and the worst organization to dictate standards is the federal government, because I think our country is so vast that it's not fair for the federal government to place standards upon all 50 states. So my feeling is you have to be very careful, you have to be very efficient, you have to try to give back to the states control over some of the spending.
Okay, Ms. Esty.
Thank you. Well, certainly the fiscal responsibility that you have at the local level and as a state representative, and I see my former colleague Arthur Emile here today, and it's challenging. It's challenging to ensure that we're providing services and we're doing it in the most cost-effective way with your tax dollars. And there are ways we can do that. Frankly, we've seen that there's been abuse in the Medicare system, and there have been efforts undertaken over the last couple of years to really try to root that out, to reject claims that look not very substantiated. And there's been pushback on Congress on this, but we need to do that because your tax dollars matter. I've worked on the Transportation Committee. I actually worked with the chairman of the Transportation Committee, Bill Schuster, on a bill that would get rid of a bunch of government reports that used to be done on paper. Nobody reads them on paper. To try to find these projects, these study projects, these written reports, put everything online, make it accessible, spend your dollars better. We should learn from experience. Not everything that was tried by Senator so-and-so or Representative so-and-so makes sense anymore. We have too many jobs programs. They should be consolidated so that the best ones are working. And that's what we ought to support. So I'm pretty practical when it comes to things like this. I want to stretch your tax dollars. And we should try things. And then we just stop doing the ones that don't work well. And I do want to flag something that came up in the last year around the Defense Department. There have been cost overruns in a number of the programs. It's made a lot of press. An important program, the F-35. This is actually something that is very important for national security for America, but also very important to the economy of the state of Connecticut. Employs thousands of people. But it's turned out there have been a lot of cost overruns, which is to say spending more money than the contract agreed to. Well, that's your tax dollars. So we were able to get a change in those contracts. So forward going, the contractors, not the taxpayers, are going to have to share in those overruns. So there are a lot of things we can do. The Defense Department is one of those areas. We need to be tougher. We need to require more accountability and make sure your tax dollars are serving the purposes they're supposed to.
Okay, Mr. Greenberg,
There is a bill called H.R. 1872. It's called the Budget Accounting and Transparency Act, which was trying to bring through a transparency of budgeting and how we spend our money. Unfortunately, Congresswoman Esty, you voted against it. But you had good company because all of your colleagues did.
Okay. Do you have a position? The F-35 came from one of the questions submitted by the public. Do you have a feeling on continued funding of the F-35?
This for me?
Yes. Yes. That was another question that came up from one of the voters, whether you would support continued funding of the F-35 plane.
Yeah, the answer...
Were you in Congress?
Yeah. In these dangerous times, it's very, very foolhardy to cut back funding on defense. I think that's just common sense at this point in time. We have to be diligent about our capability of leading this world, being a major leader. We have been for years, and if we continue to cut back on our funding on important missile systems and airplanes, which are the best in the world, I think we could give up an advantage that we have. So I would be very, very leery about reducing spending in the military, especially now, and on that plane.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Esty, do you wish to comment on that, or do you think you've covered it?
I think I mostly covered it. Yes, I believe we should have the F-35. It's important to our economy, but we do need to stay on top of these issues about cost overruns. We have many suppliers here in the state of Connecticut. These are great jobs. They're important. It's important for our national security. But whether it's this program or any other, your tax dollars need to be spent well, and we can't allow companies to rip off the American taxpayer, whether it's in defense or any other field. So we need to hold them accountable.
Okay, I think we'll go back to our panel, and we'll start with Ms. Morrow. And the question should actually go, according to my notes, first to Ms. Esty, if you would.
There's been a push for universal background checks. It's a two-part question. Where do you stand on that issue? And are there other firearm regulations you believe are needed given recent violent events?
I'm a strong supporter of universal background checks because I know that they work. And I want to say a shout out to the friends from Newtown who came here tonight. And sometimes when you run for office, which I ran, expecting and hoping that I would be working on issues of the economy and education, I have been working on those issues. And I could never have imagined the horror that was visited upon the neighboring community of Newtown. And the eyes of the nation and the prayers of the nation are with this community and with this state, with the horrible carnage that we've seen. And I think we have a special responsibility. I believe the member of Congress for the 5th District has a special responsibility to stand up and do what's right. The NRA actually used to support universal background checks. They no longer do, which is too bad. Universal background checks work. Now, somewhere between 17 and 40% of all commercial sales of guns are done outside of the background check system. And that's wrong, and it's dangerous. And it's dangerous not just for Newtown, but it's dangerous in our cities every single day where most of the flow of illegal guns happens. We need background checks to ensure that felons, domestic violence abusers, and the dangerously mentally ill do not have access to guns. That's the law, and it is so full of loopholes right now that you could drive a Mack truck through it. We should also prohibit, as a matter of federal law, straw purchasing, which is one person buying for another. And we should also prohibit the interstate trafficking of illegal weapons. Hard as it is to believe, folks, it is illegal to transport tainted milk across state lines. It's a federal felony. That is not true for transporting illegal weapons. And our law enforcement officials in this state and around the country have been begging members of Congress for years to fix this, to allow the FBI to support local law enforcement in efforts. So there's much we need to do on mental health, an area I've worked on for 30 years, but make no mistake, we have problems in this country when we have 30,000 Americans killed every year, a violent death at the end of a gun. And we are a great enough country to support the Second Amendment rights of lawful gun owners and keep our children safe in schools and on the streets and in playgrounds. We can and we should do both. And these three common sense measures, which would pass, certainly background checks would pass if we were allowed a vote in the House of Representatives, which I will keep pushing for every single day, because we need this. I don't know how long it will take, but we need to do this to keep our children safe.
Thank you. Mr. Greenberg, your response.
Yeah, I'm an independent kind of guy, and I say right now that Congresswoman Esty and I agree upon this completely. I believe in universal background checks. I believe that we have to make sure that those folks who have mental issues should not possess a gun. We have to make sure that they don't possess a gun through straw techniques. So we're in complete and total agreement on this. If you need to sign a will of sound mind and body, you should possess a gun of sound mind and body. Part of the problem in this state and elsewhere is that we don't have enough facilities to deal with people who have mental health issues. We closed Fairfield, and the system we have for dealing with mental health issues is overburdened. I spoke to an administrator at Danbury Hospital about a month and a half ago, and she said to me she can't handle, their hospital can't handle the number of mental health cases that come into the hospital. And she was begging for us to do something about that, to expand the system that will deal with mental health issues. But on this issue, I believe in universal health checks for guns as well. And we should make sure that we keep the guns out of the bad guys' hands.
Thank you. If I may?
Sure.
This must come as a surprise, the statement that Mark Greenberg just made. To the NRA, which has given him an A rating. I'll tell you, no member of Congress who supports universal background checks gets an A rating. And the Connecticut Citizens Defense League, folks who are here today, this might be a surprise to you that Mark Greenberg now supports universal background checks. It's the first I've heard of it. And I'm glad to welcome your support on that, because I think that's a great thing. But I do wonder if you've been sought and received the support of the NRA, an A rating, which is tough to get these days. And a group of strong Second Amendment rights supporters in this room who have opposed all such efforts, every single effort in this state and around the country since the tragedy at Newtown. So I am surprised by that answer, but pleased to welcome you to those who understand that we can protect the Second Amendment and to protect children. And it's not just universal background checks, other things we need to do as well.
Sorry about that. Do you wish to say anything?
Gee, I wish that Congressman Esty had asked me my opinion about it, because I had never said that I was against it. And as a matter of fact, I was as shocked as everybody was to get the A rating from the NRA, since I didn't seek it. I didn't even fill out their questionnaire. So maybe I'm going to be downgraded to an F after tonight. I don't really know. I said that I was independent, and I am independent. This is the way I feel.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Lee, next question should go first to Mr. Greenberg.
Behind every politician, there's also a person and a story. And I would like to know if you could please share a defining moment in your life that shaped your view of the world and your moral values that you're going to use to guide you if elected to make decisions for our state, and if re-elected to do the same.
Yeah, the hero in my life, which is I think what you're asking, the person who shaped my life, is right here. And that's my daddy, sitting right there. And let me tell you, this gentleman did more to shape my morals, to shape my beliefs about this country than anybody else, including Ronald Reagan. My dad took care of my mother, who was in a wheelchair for the last 25 years of her life, stricken by multiple sclerosis. Took care of her every day of that 25 years, doing all the private things, picking her up, putting her in the car, putting her in bed, putting the pillow behind her head. And I'm absolutely amazed by the strength of this man and what he did for my mother for 25 years of her life. So he's sitting right here, and I would like him to stand up. Stand up, Dad.
Okay, Ms. Esty.
Well, if we're talking heroes, might be a close call between my mother and my grandmother, but I think it would have to be my grandmother, who was a feisty woman, I have to say. And one of her favorite expressions was, to waste your talents is a sin. That's pretty hard stuff. She came from a tough background, an immigrant background, and she worked during the Depression. My grandfather lost his job at a bank when my mother was born, and they didn't have a job for 2 years, and finally my grandmother went to work to try to put food on the table. This is back before any of the programs to help anybody. Lived in an unheated cabin north of Chicago. My grandfather took a produce truck into Chicago every day to try to pound the pavement and look for work. And my grandmother fought and struggled, got a job, typed, did whatever it took, and became a member of a board of education, and actually was so inspired by, but also concerned by, this country's inability to ensure equal opportunity for all Americans, that in the 1940s she became a lobbyist for the Presbyterian Church on civil rights. She took the train from Chicago to Washington to lobby so that every child in this country would have a great education, and she's my hero. She's my hero, and she proved what somebody who works hard and believes in the highest ideals of this country can do.
Well, isn't that heartwarming, really? Thank you both for sharing. Mr. Reiser, would you have a question for, let's see, it's Ms. Esty this time first.
Yes, please. Is the body of evidence on Obamacare in Connecticut abundant enough to say, categorically that this is a program that is working and is worth supporting 100%, or is the evidence that quite the opposite, that it has to be repealed?
Your first quick answer. Yes, it is worth supporting. It has cut our uninsured rate in half. But it is not perfect. No big law ever is. And it's my job as a member of Congress to make sure that things work well. And that's why I have voted for and will continue to vote for and seek out ways that it can be improved. And I did that around grandfather plans. I did that around a number of specific initiatives. And it's not my job to be a cheerleader for a political party or the president or any law, but to make sure that things work, and that they work here, and they work well in Connecticut. Connecticut's been a leader in the country. Again, not perfect, but things are going pretty well, and we're seeing impact of it. And I will tell you, we're seeing impact of it in the people who now can get affordable health insurance because they had a pre-existing condition. And that was true for Susie Clayton in Canaan, Connecticut. She's saving $1,500 a month because she's a 2-time breast cancer survivor. It was virtually out of reach for her. Everyone in the audience who's got a child between 18 and 26 is benefiting because your kids are covered by health insurance now. So it's not perfect. It shouldn't be repealed, though. Repeal is the wrong answer. Fix it. That's about most things. Fix it, and that's what I'm working to do.
Okay, Mr. Greenberg, your feelings.
Well, I call for repeal and replace. I don't call for repeal without replace. I call for repeal and replace. Look, I've said that 2,600 pages and 20,000 pages of statutes and code that go with it are way too long. I've said that any book which is greater and longer than the Holy Bible or Ayn Rand's Fountainhead is too big for the federal government and is fraught with issues and disasters. And I think Obamacare has those issues and disasters. Now, as a practical matter, we're not going to repeal it for 2 years. Doesn't matter. Whether we take the Senate, we have the House, we're not going to repeal it. So we have to do some things to try to fix it, I guess, in the next 2 years. We have to have catastrophic insurance sold across state lines. Right now, the states dictate which insurance products are sold. You can get a catastrophic policy in Connecticut. You can't get it in New York. Obamacare has created tiers of subsidies, you might say, where the income levels are at certain tiers, and your subsidy would be based upon that tier. So you could artificially manipulate whether you get a greater subsidy by making an extra $1 or so. By the way, with Obamacare now, if I decided myself and my business to have an adjusted gross income of 0 or negative, I would be entitled to Obamacare, which is absurd. So Obamacare has a lot of mistakes, problems, and issues. Companies are trying to figure out a way to navigate around the mandate by having only 49 full-time workers as opposed to 50. So I find, being in business 39 years, that companies find ways to manipulate around laws, you might say. And I don't think that this is good. I don't think the health delivery system is going to get any better by Obamacare. And frankly, I think that we deal too much with premium as opposed to access to proper medical care. We have to make sure that we maintain the best medical care in the world. So let's not forget about medical care and focus only on premium or subsidizing some people who can't afford it. Let's make sure job one is access to the best medical care in the world.
Mr. Reiser, do you have a follow-up on that?
Yes, please. Just real quick.
Both candidates, yes.
Real quickly. Mark, is your insurance situation better now than it was before Obamacare?
Well, you know, it's funny that you'd ask that, because I'll give you a real-life example. I was forced to go from my group plan to an individual plan with Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. My insurance premium for a family, and I have a large family, I have seven people in the family, 5 kids, was $2,300 per month with a very small deductible at the time. I was forced to go into an insurance product where the insurance premium is $1,650 per month, but the total of the co-pays and the deductibles are $6,000 a year. So you can do quick math and determine that from a cost standpoint, it's actually costing us more. The coverage is essentially the same, but it's actually costing us more because of compliance with Obamacare products.
Ms. Esty, would you have a comment on that, or was it just too personal a question?
No, I don't participate in the government-subsidized health care. I get it through my spouse, and it is largely the same at Yale as it was before.
Okay, I would like to take another question that comes from the voters, and then we'll go back to our panel, if I may. This one is slightly long, and it goes to Mr. Greenberg first. Given the fact that income inequality has deepened in our country since 2008, would you support increasing the maximum taxable earnings for Social Security from $117,000 to capture more resources for Social Security Trust Fund from more affluent Americans?
No. I mean, look, increasing the ceiling from what is presently higher is just a tax increase on people who are already paying too much taxes. I have been very vocal, very determined, and now I'll make clear to this audience and elsewhere that I am in favor of increasing the retirement age from 67 to 70. I've said that before. I don't hide from that position. When Social Security was created, the average lifespan for a man was 65. The exact age that you would be collecting Social Security. Essentially, it was a plan for the widow. Now, we live a lot longer. We're productive a lot longer. We work a lot longer. Why is it wrong to raise the retirement age from 67 to 70 and ask younger people only, to work a little bit longer to ensure that they have a system when they retire, to ensure that the system will remain solvent? You could go right now on the Social Security website, and they'll tell you on page 1 that in approximately 15 years, there will only be 73% of the money necessary in order to pay benefits. Well, that basically is saying that the system will be insolvent. I've called for this debate. I want to have a discussion about how we save Social Security, not only for those people who are 52 or older, for which there will be no change in benefits, but also for the younger people who I think will contribute a few extra weeks a year to make sure that the system works for them and for their children. Let's have a debate about it. Let's not hide. Let's not put our heads in the sand. Let's not kick it down the road. Let's talk about it. Let's get in a room. But unfortunately, professional politicians who care most about their own jobs and most about their own re-election, are thinking about their re-election next and trying to avoid a hard discussion about the issue. I'm willing to have that hard discussion on the issue. I'm willing to take a vote on that and votes on other issues which might ensure that I do not get re-elected. I'm willing to do the right thing for the future of America and to make sure that Social Security is there for young Americans for the future.
Thank you. Ms. Esty.
I think it's worth looking at raising the cap. And I am not a supporter of the proposal to increase the retirement age. And I'll tell you why. It's easy if you're a professional and you're very wealthy like Mark Greenberg to keep working for a long time. It's easy if you make your living doing mental work. But if you are physical labor, if you work in a nursing home making minimum wage, it's just not reasonable to think you're going to be able to do your job. Somebody who works on your construction sites, I'll bet you probably don't have 69-year-olds driving backhoes and hammering nails into 2x4s. So we have to be realistic. Many people are living longer, but not everybody is able to work longer. And we need a fair system. We need a system that recognizes the dignity of work for all Americans.